Welcome to the studio. I'm going to take a few minutes of your time and show you how I processed this image of Horseshoe Bend in Page, Arizona. This is an HDR image, or high dynamic range. These are made using various exposures of the same image, and they're stacked and processed by Photoshop. So to begin, we're going to open up Photoshop. I use a program called HDR Effects Pro by the NIK Collection, NIK. There's some other filters and tools within that collection that are pretty useful, but I find myself using the HDR Effects Pro the most out of all of those. So if you go to File, down to Automate, and merge to HDR Effects Pro 2, it'll open up this dialog box where you can select your images that this software is going to stack into one image. So we're going to open up our files. So we're already in the volume there, Southwest trip, Page, Arizona, and we're going to find a couple of these exposures that I want to use. So you can see on this that this one's pretty dark. Find my spot again. This one's a little lighter yet, and this one is pretty well overexposed. So I'm going to stack these 4 images. Now you can use any amount that you want. The less the amount of images, the better the stack usually comes out, especially if you're dealing with vegetation. The vegetation, trees, the leaves move, and it does end up with some stacking artifacts in that situation. So this one should be fine though, that the trees are pretty far away. So I'm going to take these 4 exposures and open them up. So after it evaluates each image for the exposure settings, it gives you kind of a preview of what the stack will look like. Now you can drag this slider around to lighten or darken the image. You can pick a different reference image from up here if you like one of them a little better than the others. For this photo, it doesn't particularly matter, but if you do have vegetation or anything, that might change some of your lines or the composition. You might select a different one. So we'll stick with that one right there. I don't change any of these settings. I just go ahead and create the HDR and let the software do its thing. Now this is the image that it has stacked and given me. Here to the left you've got some pre-made basically filters, various changes to all of our sliders over here, the presets. I just use a couple of them typically, and even then I tend to back it off a little bit from what they've got. So that looks too dark. I enjoy good dramatic images, but that's just a little bit much for me. Usually the deep 1 and deep 2 are 2 of them I use. Deep 1 looks pretty good. I'm going to back some of this off, make a couple changes to it before I load it into Photoshop. I don't do a whole lot with these settings in this menu. but I will load up Camera Raw after I get the image into Photoshop and change some of those as well. I think that'd be fine to start with. So now it's brought the image into Photoshop to where I can continue to edit it and put some finishing touches on it. So I typically use Camera Raw to do a lot of my editing. I know a lot of people won't agree with that. It is destructive editing, so there's no way to go back and change the individual items that you adjust. But I find the settings in here, changing them works best for me. There are other methods to use, and do whatever you're comfortable with. But this is what I usually do. So in this image, I'm gonna just make some quick changes to our tones and the lighting a little bit. Usually landscape photos, I'll drag my highlights down. Typically dealing with the sky, if I've got clouds, dragging that highlight down will make those clouds come out a little bit better. And this is just to taste, whatever. Just change it until you like the image, because in the end that's all that really matters. So you got to be careful with the texture and the clarity here if you do use that. A lot of these settings, if you get a little too carried away with them, they do add quite a bit of noise and will clip some of the colors, your darks and your lights. So if I don't like the overall tone of the image, I'll adjust it ever so slightly here with the temperature. If I want it to look a little more, more sunny, you can drag that around just a little bit. So I think that looks pretty good like that. We'll just okay it, and feel pretty good about the colors and everything. Now, I don't always clean my lens the best, and so I look around for these little dust bunnies and use the spot healing tool to get rid of those. So and some of these gradients in the corner, you can use that spot healing brush tool and kind of get rid of those too, clean them up a little bit, so it doesn't typically cause too many issues. But if it looks like there's some lines that you're going to notice like that, you just undo it. So that looks pretty good. So now, one last step before I consider this image done. I do use Topaz Labs Denoise AI tool in most of my images. It doesn't look bad, but if you zoom in on here, you can see, it's a little noisy. The HDR images, especially when you're stacking multiple exposures, tend to end up with, sometimes slightly out of focus because of the multiple exposures, but they also end up with some noise in them. Especially this picture, because it was taken at sunset. There's not a lot of light on the front side of this cavern. There's plenty of light on top, but not really much down in these corners. So I'll run that denoise tool. And now you can see if I hit this original button, kind of what it does. It does sharpen up, you know, if you keep an eye down there, it does sharpen up pretty decent some of the areas. So, but I'll drag this little box around and check out multiple spots on the image and see, just make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. And if you drag this remove noise button slider too far, you know, you start to get a cartoony looking image in some of the places. You know, it takes a lot of the texture out of it, kind of smooths things out a little too much. So I keep it down there a little ways. So I think I'll accept that. It's not too bad. Still a little noisy on the far background here, but overall it's not bad. So that's the image as it's been denoised. Doesn't look too bad. So there we have what I would consider my final image for this photograph. Again, this is Horseshoe Bend in Page, Arizona, using Photoshop, NIK tools, the HDR Effects Pro, and Topaz Labs Denoise tool. Keep an eye out for more videos coming. I'll see you around.